All right, I think we'll get started for tonight's program. I want to welcome all of you who have joined us tonight. I'm Stephanie Pramick, a member of the reference staff at the Napa County Library, and I'm excited to have Dr. Mark Teaford here this evening as he begins the three-part series called What Are Primates and How Do They Live in the Wild? My colleague, Katie Olding, will be joining me at the end of the talk and will handle the question and answer portion of the program. So you may type in your questions at any time during the program, but Dr. Teaford will answer them after his talk. Our closest living relatives display a remarkable array of adaptations and live in an impressive array of habitats. Over the next 3 months, Dr. Mark Teaford of Touro University will give viewers a brief tour of modern primates, starting with lemurs and lemur-like primates, then on to old and new world monkeys, and finally apes. Dr. Mark Teaford is an anthropologist and anatomist. He has spent most of his career teaching and doing research at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland. He has also worked at High Point University in North Carolina and is currently a professor and vice chair for the Department of Basic Medicine at Touro University in Vallejo. Throughout his career, he has done outreach to the communities he's worked in by giving public talks at places like libraries, schools, and even REI to a range of audiences, everything from elementary school students to retirees to science teachers. Tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Mark Teaford.
Well, thank you very much. This is a great pleasure. I think after the events of today, and amidst all the COVID craziness, we all need a chance to just sort of sit back and relax and look at something different. Okay, so this is a topic that, this is not something you wake up in the morning and think about unless you're a primatologist. But it's something that's fascinating. These are our closest living relatives. And so this is going to be it's supposed to be the first of 3 talks. And so first Wednesday, January, February, March. And in each one, we're going to look at the anatomy, behavior, and ecology of different groups of primates. And we're going to focus today on intro to primates. What are they? And then lemurs and lemur-like primates. February is then talk about monkeys, and then March we'll talk about apes. And in each case, we'll come back to the same basic, anatomy, behavior, ecology. And it's just, fun facts, interesting sidelights, etc. Now, what's a primate? Well, there's a basic problem here because we don't have unique traits. We don't have traits that set us apart from all other animals. We don't have primates in general. I mean, yes, humans have some odd traits, but primates in general, we don't have traits that set them apart from everybody. Instead, we're generalized, actually. We're not quite as specialized in many ways as other animals. So a lot of times, these defining features or traits, you may find them expressed to a great degree in some primates and a lesser degree in other ones. But still, it's just sort of a general pattern. And so what you see is talk about trends, for instance, talk about a generalized body plan. What does that mean? Well, look at this comparison here. Here's a comparison of primate, a human, arm and hand here, forearm and hand, etc., versus say a horse and something like a bison. All right. And we're very generalized. We have 5 digits here. We've got a lot of mobility up here at the shoulder joint. Okay. Compare that with a horse where, look at this here. Here's the humerus, the arm. So this would be the elbow. Here's the forearm. And this is all ankle and foot. It's been tremendously modified to, aiming for speed and movement basically in one basic plane of motion. The limbs are going forward and backward like that. They don't really come out of the screen at you like that. Something like a bison, similar, but a lot more support. Okay, yes, they can move quickly, but a lot of support there as well. Okay, but again, limited movements. And primates, a little more generalized. greater range of motion. Look at the hands and feet, and primates generally have grasping hands and feet. Now, say generally, because you look at this range of different species and you find some differences. Here's one interesting character we're going to come back to called the eye. Look at this very unusual middle finger here. We'll talk about what that does. And of course, you look at all these and you say, wow, our feet are kind of weird, okay, compared to other primates. They've been modified because our hind limbs are basically weight supports now. We walk on our hind limbs all the time, unlike all other primates. Yes, some primates can stand up, but they're not going to habitually walk on their hind legs, all right? And so as a result, their feet are not modified like this. But generally, primates across the board tend to have grasping hands and feet. There are other aspects in terms of nails and claws and stuff. We're not going to get into that here. Another crucial one, though, is also our fields of vision, the right and left eye, overlap. So we have good stereoscopic vision. Compare that with a horse again, where basically the eyes are looking out the sides here, and there's essentially no overlap. All right. Now, this is one of those things where you have a range of possibilities in primates. Here are two primates. This is a lemur. This is one of the animals we'll talk about today. And if you look down at the skull from above, you see its eyes point out to the sides slightly compared to this capuchin monkey here, where it goes straight ahead. Okay, but still, the field of vision will overlap. It won't be separate fields like this, and the animals will still have decent stereoscopic vision. Associated with that, we tend to have small snouts, noses. It's our faces are flat, basically. Again, some lemurs have pretty long faces, but we're still not the same as, say, this hedgehog here. And there are other differences in the skull associated with that modification there. We tend to have relatively large, complex brains. Certainly humans and apes, sort of the epitome of that, but primates in general, again, pretty relatively large, complex brains compared to other animals in general. So who are we talking about here? Here is we're not going to get into the phylogeny, the evolutionary history here, but these are the characters we're going to talk about today. Lemur-like ones, and this little thing called tarsiers, prosimians here. The next talk, we'll talk about monkeys, old world monkeys like baboons, new world monkeys like capuchin monkeys or howler monkeys. And then the March talk, we'll talk about apes. And maybe we'll get into some comparisons with humans. But this is the cast of characters, if you will, for primates in general, modern primates. Now, what are all these things? Well, lemurs are restricted to Madagascar. Okay, that's an island off the east coast of Africa. We'll come back to that in a little bit when we talk about ecology. Here's just a sampling of some of them. Here is that unusual one, the eye with that very odd finger. This thing looks like made out of spare parts. I mean, it looks like an opossum or something. I mean, it's a bizarre creature. Hapalemur, very interesting dietary specializations we'll come back to. Injury, the biggest of the prosimians. It weighs 10, 11 pounds, something like that. And very territorial, has a long call, which we'll hear later. Shafaka, which is sort of the second biggest of the prosimians, and has very good leaping capabilities and a very interesting, varied diet. This is the one you've probably seen most often, ringtail lemurs. They are sort of the jack of all trades for prosimians. I mean, they exist in multiple habitats, and they are active during the day, as are all of these except for this guy here. But as a result, we know a lot about their social organization. They have some interesting social traits. This one here is just pretty. What can I say? But this is called the blue-eyed black lemur. And you say, huh? Because it's dichromatic. This is the female, which is brown, and the males are black. Go figure, okay? So they're named for the black male, not for the female. This is a shot from a photographer at the Duke Lemur Center here. David Herring, just marvelous photographer, amazing work. But Madagascar, where is it? Here's a map of Africa. Here's that island off the coast here. They've been on this island for millions of years. And as a result, they've been able to evolve into a whole bunch of different niches and stuff. Lots of different niches. Relatively few predators too. Now, the main predator nowadays is the fossa. It's a cat-like mammal, about 6 feet long to the end of its tail. And in some ways, it looks like a cat. It looks like a little puma or something like that. All right. Other ways, you say, well, yeah, maybe it's actually more closely related to the mongoose. But this is far and away the largest predator on Madagascar now. All right, so this does go after lemurs. Now, in the past, there were other ones, like the Malagasy crowned hawk eagle, this big thing here. This poor little prosimian about to get latched onto by this thing. This bird is, was the size of something like the Indri today. I mean, this bird was huge, but it went extinct about 500 years ago because humans kept hunting its prey. So as the prey disappeared, these numbers dwindled, and this animal eventually became extinct about 500 years ago. Now, until 2,000 years ago, there were some much larger lemurs on Madagascar, the so-called subfossil lemurs, but they were driven to extinction by human hunting and fragmentation of their habitats as the humans started farming and things like that. Now, they're called subfossil lemurs because they haven't been gone long enough to fossilize, basically. So we find their remains in cave sites and stuff in Madagascar, but they haven't turned to stone yet. So they're subfossil, is what it amounts to. The size of some of these is pretty impressive. The largest lemur, remember, is the Indri, weighs about 10 pounds. One of its ancestors weighed about 20 times that amount. Here's a modern human, okay? Here is a representation of that ancestor, Archaeoindris. Big thing. I mean, that's pretty impressive. And you can tell, you get some idea looking at the limbs here. This animal was pretty much active on the ground, although it had the ability, because it has these long arms and short legs, to basically climb up trees in unusual ways. But that isn't the largest of the subfossil lemurs. There's another one called Megalatopus. Isn't that a good name? Megalatopus. So it was the size of a modern gorilla. So here's a skull of one at the Duke Lemur Center. There's a fossil portion of the Duke Lemur Center and an extant version or portion of it. Here is a juvenile of the same thing. This skull is about, let's see here, 2.5 feet long, something like that. This is not a little lemur. Okay, so these things were big back then, but think of it, you're on an island. Okay, if you have humans show up and they start, cutting down forests and stuff, there's no place for these animals to go. And so, yes, they became extinct, unfortunately. Lorises, another portion of the prosimians. These are not limited to Madagascar. In fact, they're not found on Madagascar. They're found in Africa and Asia. And there's an array of those as well here. So this right here is the slow loris, aptly named, as we'll talk about behavior. This is the slender loris, which has some interesting adaptations. The galago or bush baby. It's called a bush baby because some of its vocalizations sound like babies crying in the woods. What can I say? As you get an indication of here, it's a great leaper. This one is the pato here from Africa. So these are in Asia. These are in Africa. Okay. Notice they all seem to have big eyes. They're all nocturnal. Okay. They're all active at night. So here's a map showing roughly where they are. So patos and bush babies in sub-Saharan Africa. Here's Madagascar, where the lemurs are again. Southeast Asia, where the lorises are here. Okay, and that's it. So none of them are up in the northern temperate regions or colder. anywhere else. Interestingly, the prosimians were much, much, much more widespread if you go back into the Paleocene or Eocene, millions of years ago. You could find them in North America, South America, Europe, etc. And they became more and more and more restricted as other types of primates came on the scene. And we'll probably come back to that when we talk about apes. And finally, tarsiers, islands of Southeast Asia. These look like they're from another planet. Little tiny things, from head to rump, it's probably 5-6 inches, something like that. It does have a little long, skinny tail, but not that big. Okay. Yes. Again, big eyes. Okay. There's multiple species of them because they live on different islands. Okay. So you've got different species developing there. But point is, there's an array of them, but they're tiny. But again, they're nocturnal. Here's just an indication of where they are. So this is all Southeast Asia. So Borneo, certainly a portion of Sumatra. They haven't extended all the way up through it. Portion of the Philippines, Celebes Islands. So, not a huge range here, but a variety of different islands. And it turns out that, virtually every one, as you can see here by the color coding, has a different species of tarsier on it. So a couple of anatomy tidbits here, general traits of lemurs and lemur-like primates. We talked about primate traits before. Lemurs tend to have a moist nose like a dog. Here's another classic shot, David Herring from Duke Lemur Center. So this sort of thing where you see the sort of a wet nose, if you will. They also tend to have a reflective membrane behind their retina. This helps the retina get as much as possible out of the light coming into it. So it helps them see at night. But it's the thing that allows you, if you're out on a night walk and you're shining a flashlight, you see the reflection of their eyes in the light. All right. So these are general traits for lemurs, lemur-like primates. There are other things having to do with the shape of the skull, the type of placenta, all kinds of things. But these are, just some general straightforward ones. But here's some interesting sidelights for them. So the ii, nocturnal, has this weird suite of features related to percussive foraging. Okay. Again, you can't quite read it here, but Duke Lemur Center, the best collection, the biggest collection of live prosimians outside of Madagascar. I mean, it's astounding. It really is. And you get a glimpse of that bizarre finger there. Okay. It's also got very big ears. What's going on here? Percussive foraging. Well, it's like, a stud finder, if you will. What it's going to do is it goes along tree branches, living or dead, and taps with this finger. Tap, 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 tap. And what it's doing, it's always doing it in this position with its ears aimed at the trunk. And it's going to pick up sounds of little grubs inside the bark. Okay? So tap, tap, tap. It listens for a response from these grubs. And that's primarily what it's going to be going after. So you say, well, okay, it found some grubs. How does it get to them? Here's its other adaptation. Look at this skull. Look at the front teeth on this, the incisors. This is the only primate with ever-growing incisors. In other words, it's like a rat or a rabbit, okay, where those incisors have to be used. They're used all the time, okay? And so what they do is once they get a location, they will bite into this bark and peel away chunks of it until they get down to where the grubs are. And then they use this finger, this is that narrow middle finger, almost like a little pipe cleaner, stick it in there and hook it around the grubs. Some cases they will find other types of insects that will actually grab onto it and they can pull the finger out and then just lick the insects off it. But usually it's grubs and they'll just hook the grub with it, okay, and pull it out. Now, it can also use its teeth and middle finger to get into eggs. Now, here's an interesting little video. Let's see if this works here. To show you a couple of the iis at the Duke Lemur Center. They've been given eggs. How are they going to get into it? let's just, it shows you how they use the middle finger too. And then tap, 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 tap. And look at the incisor. And this is not a hard-boiled egg. There we go. Click, 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 click. Pretty amazing. And you can see that end result, it doesn't even leave a big, it leaves that little hole that it bit in one end. And that's it. They managed to get into this egg with their teeth and then use that finger to get the egg out in the yolk and white out. Amazing. Whoops, let's go down here. Okay, another anatomical detail. Shafaka, okay, large lemur, okay, sometimes referred to as the dancing lemur because of the way it hops if it comes on the ground. Usually it's in the trees. Let's go to this one first. Here is a classic time-lapse photography showing that jumping. So coming down, hop, 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 going across the path here. And this video will show a little bit of its leaping capabilities. And then also some of this hopping. Pretty amazing again. Oh, I'm going to turn the volume down because it's got a soundtrack with it. Pretty good leaper, huh? Of course, we can anthropomorphize here and put all kinds of emotions into those movements because some of them, it looks like they're saying, oh, I'm free, I'm out dancing. But point is, if they have a large space between trees and it's so large that they can't jump between the trees, they will come to the ground and hop between the trees. It's kind of fun. Oops, let's see if I can get this to, there we go. Now, yeah, tremendous leaper. This is actually shot at the Duke Lemur Center. So yeah, it's sort of a temperate forest in the fall with the leaves turning, etc. But just a beautiful shot again of, takeoff in this case. So they take off this push from the powerful legs and then they swivel those legs under them. So they land with those legs, okay? Now, here's the catch. In the wild, oftentimes, they're doing this. You see, you can jump like 30 feet, okay? They're landing in the spiny forest on these sorts of trees. Look at that trunk. It's like landing on an acacia tree or something. I mean, how do they do that? They have very tough skin on their hands and feet, all right? But they can actually leap between these spiny trees. Again, pretty impressive. What can we say? But relatively speaking, the title of the greatest leaping primate goes to the tarsier, for sure. Remember, it's only 5 or 6 inches long, okay? The key to its success, look carefully at the limbs here, the hind limb. This is the thigh. So there's the knee. Here's the leg. Here's the heel. Look at this long ankle. That's what gives gives the animal its name. The tarsus is the ankle, okay? So this is the tarsius. It has a huge tarsal. okay, bone. And so what you end up with is ability to jump. Oh yeah, 5 to 6 inches. It can jump 15 feet. 15 feet. Just try to imagine that for something that little. That's impressive. And it's the only carnivorous primate. In other words, it eats nothing but meat. Yes, there are other primates that do eat meat, okay? For instance, chimpanzees certainly do, all right? Some New World monkeys do, okay? Baboons do, but they eat lots of other things. This only eats meat. Now, meat meaning could be insects or whatever, but man, it makes good use of this leaping ability, okay? You're just bounding between the trees and imagine this poor, I don't know what that is, what that would be in that, like a katydid sort of thing. And all of a sudden this drops out of the sky on it. Pretty amazing predator. So yes, it will also do things like small, little teeny tiny mammals or baby birds or other things. Okay, but lots of insects like this. And using that jumping. Now, the tarsier isn't the only interesting for that. Check this out, 2 other traits. Yes, it has big eyes. In fact, each of its eyes is bigger than its brain. Okay. If we had eyes that size, they would be the size of grapefruits. Okay, put it in perspective. Huge eyes. These eyes are really sensitive. They let the animal see at night when it's active, okay? They can process a lot of light, okay? But the eyes are so big that they can barely move in their sockets. We can move our eyes back and forth, left and right, track objects across our visual field. These can't, all right? So what does it do? The other anatomical feature that's interesting, it has a very mobile neck. It can turn its head like crazy. In fact, it's the only mammal that can turn its head and look over its back, like almost 180 degrees. That's pretty astounding. But it needs that. It's got to be able to keep on the lookout all around it because it can't really move its eyeballs that much. So go figure. By contrast, the slow loris is very slow. When it goes after something, it sneaks up on it very slow. If you're watching a video of it, you say, come on already, come on. It doesn't disturb the branches or anything. And then gets just close enough and then boom, shoots out a hand and grabs it. So it's just a very different sort of predator. Right? Now, you might think that if it moves this slowly, it might be really vulnerable to predators. But it has a trick up its sleeve, literally. If threatened, it'll raise its arms like this and lick oil secreting glands in the upper, under the armpit there, and then bite whatever is threatening. The mixture of the oil from the glands with saliva is then channeled via these front teeth into the bite, and it causes tissue death, necrosis, even anaphylactic shock in humans. Okay, so this is not a creature to be messed with. There are lots and lots of stories in the literature about people saying, don't try to make these pets. Okay, just don't do that. It won't work well for either of you. Now, interestingly, recent research, largely spearheaded by Anna Nakaris, has suggested that this behavior is used most often in fights between males. Here is one poor male. Okay, look at the top of his head. This is an animal in a study group. So he had a radio collar and a little GPS marker here that transmitted location and other information. And this is the antenna for it. But look here. down to the bone here, and you're already getting tissue. Well, it's the fascia on top of bone. You're getting tissue death right there. Okay. This animal is a young male. In this particular group, when they reach a certain age, they leave their social group. Well, he decided not to leave. Well, the dominant male in the group, this guy right here, said, sorry, and bit him. And the really ew sort of thing is, this is the father and this is the son. Okay. So he went after his own son with one of these necrotic bites. This individual here, actually in the study group, there is the least amount of data on this individual for things like body weight and stuff, because he is just so nasty to handle. He just has a temperament. And he actually killed one of the individuals in his group. This individual actually survived, even though it looks like he's been, through a car wreck or something. All right, so yeah, interesting trait. In fact, that research group has suggested that maybe some of the markings are mimicking the markings of the spectacled cobra. In fact, they sort of play off each other. All right, the eyes, you can vision the face here, etc. You can't prove that, but the point is, this thing has a nasty bite. What can we say? All right, let's move on. Behavioral traits. Now, all persimmons outside of Madagascar are nocturnal, so they have big eyes. All right. But another way to think of that is that they're nocturnal wherever their ranges overlap with those of monkeys or apes. Okay, so they've sort of moved into the nocturnal realm in the face of competition with monkeys and apes. These may form sleeping groups during the day, because that's when they sleep, but then they tend to travel alone and forage alone at night. So we have very few, there's not a lot of data on behavioral interactions. All right, there's just not nearly as much as with other species. So one standard is the mother and infant. Okay, so males tend to roam around the larger territory with multiple male or female infant groups within that territory. All right. Interestingly, some podos and tarshiers may have male-female couples, monogamous pairs. Again, it's hard to document, all right, but there are probably a few that do that. But for the most part, you have female and infant as sort of the group, and then the males sort of circulating around through the area. Classic shot from the late 70s by a gentleman, Pierre Charles Dominique, who did a lot of the initial work on these nocturnal primates. And he discovered that in many, like the slender loris, the mom will park the infant on a branch and go off and feed, and then come back and pick up the infant. Okay. Now, other prosimians, the mom actually will carry the infant around in the mouth, which is kind of interesting. So here's the tail of the infant wrapped around the mom here. So yeah, they have some interesting traits, if you will. The diurnal ones, the ones active during the day, are found in much bigger groups. So males, females, infants, whole range there. And that means they're easier to observe, so we know more about their behaviors. So that's interesting. So one thing we know is females often care for the infants, all right, with, oftentimes not a lot of help from the males, but sometimes the males will play with the infants, even if the infants are not their own. That's an interesting one. How did that happen? What's going on here? Do we have some sort of benefit in the long term, or what's happening? Okay, so yes, mom is still the caretaker of the infants, and notice the species, they tend to give birth to twins, all right? But the males oftentimes will play with the infants, even if the infants are not their own. Interesting. Now, ringtail lemurs are one of the few, well, ringtails and a couple other lemur species, one of the few where females are dominant over males. This is generally not determined by fighting. In fact, this is actually two males here, but instead by priority of access to desired resources. Put that in quotes because it could be food, it could be sleeping spots, it could be mates. All right, sleeping spots, it may just be priority to the best spot. Basically, if it's a very cold environment, the best spot may be right in here where you're staying warmest. Okay, but generally, females will be dominant over males. Again, the Duke Lemur Center has some videos, interesting videos of some of the interactions between males and females, and you can see in some of the cases, well, like that one lemur with where the female is orangey brown and the male is black, and the female's chasing the male away all the time. It's kind of impressive. Other behavioral traits. Well, even nocturnal persimmons rely on visual communication in some ways. This is a threat by a tarsier. Realize the animal's 6 inches high. Okay, so trying to stand up and look ferocious, basically. Another possibility here, another threat is a threat posture, like with the potto here, where it will get into this arc. It has expanded plates on its vertebrae back here. So what it's doing is exposing this part to where a predator might attack, puts its head actually farther down, even between its arms. And it has longish hairs here that are very, very sensitive to tell it if something is approaching really closely. And if it does, then it might spring up and bite. But it will, matter of course, it will assume this posture to sort of say, see if the predator might even actually proceed or not. Now, another thing persimmons do is often rely on olfactory communication, sense of smell. So here is a ringtail lemur at Duke where they have scent glands near the anus here, and you're rubbing the scent gland on the tree, leaving a scent there. Okay. They also have them though on their wrist, the scent glands here on the wrist. This animal here looks to be just sort of sitting there holding its tail, etc. But actually what it's doing is it's rubbing the tail with the scent gland. So the scent is being put on the tail. And then what they will do in the mating season is they will come down and they will arch the tail over the back and over the head like this individual is doing and shake it at other individuals. So they're zapping them with the scent, sending the scent of this animal to this animal. Sometimes they will face off, and it's kind of interesting to watch where they're flicking their tails at each other. But usually the subordinate animal will back off. All right. So just this stink fight, as it's referred to, most often seen in males in mating season, where the males are trying to get access to females. And so the dominant one will basically, in essence, scare off the subordinate one by flinging its scent at the animal. I told you they're interesting. What can we say? Some persimmons are territorial and mark their territory with loud calls. So this is the injury here, pictures of it calling. Remember, this is the biggest modern primate. Listen to this thing. I'm gonna turn up the volume, and then I'll probably have to turn it down because they are loud. They're impressive. But we don't need to hear that. Here we go. Imagine hearing that at night. That'd be kind of spooky. But you can hear them for hundreds of yards through the forest. It's kind of impressive. I mean, you're hearing multiple males going back and forth in this case, but you can hear them for a long distance. We'll come back to that later when later talks when we talk about monkeys and in apes too. The same sort of territorial calling. Here's some other examples. Here's a tarsier one. I'm not even sure you'll be able to hear this. It's sort of like a chatter. Let's see if I can turn this up as far. There you go. Fascinating little things. This slow loris one here is actually more of a, it shows the animal moving through the trees and then going after a bug on a branch there. So you can check that one out for yourself there. Well, we can show a little bit of it here, but it's got a narrator talking through some of the, or through most of it.
A ghostly apparition appears in the branches. One of the most primitive primates in the world.
Notice it has that reflection.
The slender
in its
loris,
eyes.
named for its very slender limbs. Once Sri Lanka would have been filled with these strange little creatures.
So this is the slender. Sorry, label it slow loris. This is the slender. It's not quite as slow.
As forest habitat shrinks, so too does its presence. Tonight, this male loris uses his excellent night vision to seek out the ripest fruits. He uses his spindly limbs to maneuver through spindly branches. But those little dexterous hands and feet are designed for more than just plucking fruit. Got it. A delicious dragonfly.
Ah, yes. So sorry, I mislabeled it. Slender loris. Duke Lemur Center has various YouTube recordings where they have the voices of different prosimians, and you can actually step through them, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, check it out when you get a chance. Oops, let's go back to that. There we go. Now a little bit on ecology. Prosimians live in a variety of habitats. Many of them are under threat of extinction, often habitat destruction. Mining in Madagascar for gemstones. Basically you go and clear the forest, pollute the water. It just does no good whatsoever. Also slash and burn agriculture, going through and basically getting rid of the trees so you can plant crops. But the problem is, the crops grow for 2 or 3 years. There's no rotation or anything. And at the end of 2 or 3 years, the soil is depleted and you can't grow anything else. And then the farmers move on and you end up with, a barren plot left. Net result is this area here used to be all forest in Madagascar. This is from a site where they're trying to, sponsor the planting of trees to actually, regrow some of the forests. And there are other forms of habitat destruction for sure, but another big problem for these primates is the pet trade. Lorises in particular have been portrayed as cute, little fuzzy toys and all that kind of stuff. And as a result, people try to get them as pets. And the number of animals that die in transit is just stunning. So yeah, a huge threat for certain prosimians. Here's a sort of a estimate of primate species richness today, where red is highest richness. Here's a guesstimate, end of the century, if things aren't changed somehow. Habitats are decreasing. Look at the Amazon basin. If the forests keep decreasing, yes, we're going to lose species. No two ways around it. But they can still tell us some interesting ecological things. Okay, So let's look at some of those. In the face of resource scarcity, the ring-tailed lemur has been known to eat feces of other animals. Say, oh, okay. From cattle, dogs, and even humans. Go figure. Other prosimians, like the sportive lemur, lemur, will eat their own feces because they eat a very fibrous diet, and processing it twice, in essence, releases more nutrients into their system. What's interesting for some people may not be so interesting for others. What can we say? The fat-tailed dwarf lemur, another way of dealing with resource scarcity in the dry season, it hibernates. It's the only primate that does that. And 5 to 7 months a year, it goes into torpor. Its heart rate drops from 180 beats a minute. It's a small animal, okay? It's one of the smallest primates, to 8 to 10 beats a minute. Its body temperature will drop from 98 degrees Fahrenheit to ambient temperature, which can be below 60, really. So every 6 to 12 days, it will sort of, come out of the torpor slightly and rewarm itself and then go back to sleep, again. Just amazing. How does it do it? Well, during the wet season, the last half of the wet season, it gorges itself on fruit and flowers and stores the fat in its tail. Here's the tail normally. Here it is before dry season, before hibernation. It's like storing up all its resources here, and we'll come back and use them during hibernation. Pretty amazing. And as a last example, 3 species of bamboo lemurs. Okay, the greater, lesser, and golden. This one made a lot of news. Let's see here now. 18 years ago, it was basically discovered. There was a new species of bamboo lemur. They're aptly named. They all eat bamboo. Okay, that's what they eat. They live in the same habitats often. Not always, but often. How do they coexist? They divvy up the food. The greater bamboo lemur prefers the woody pulp. Okay, the lesser prefers the leaf bases and will eat a different species sometimes than the other ones. And the golden bamboo lemur eats the shoots. You say, okay, well, that's interesting. They're divvying things up. That's good. So what? The shoots of this species of bamboo contain 15 milligrams of cyanide per 100 grams of fresh weight. The golden bamboo lemur eats approximately 5 times that amount every day. At least 12 times the toxic dose for an animal that size. How does it do it? We don't know yet. Okay, there have been a fair number of studies on how do pandas manage to eat bamboo. It isn't quite as toxic as this species, but we don't know for sure how these little guys are managing it. 12 times the toxic dose for an animal that size. That's impressive. So I'm going to wrap things up here and say, well, I hope you can see that primates and prosimians are pretty intriguing. Mirror studies are always fascinating to see a reflection and say, what is that? And it's like this point of recognition. These are both, again, out of the Duke Lemur Center, where they're trying some cognition studies with lemurs, and in this case, lemur and shapaka. So I'm going to wrap it up there and ask, are there any questions? To do this, I'm going to come out of this here and stop that and bring this back here. So any questions about any of this stuff? All kinds of things.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, once again, my name's Katie, and if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom. So just feel free to enter them in there. If not, luckily, we will be seeing Mark also next month. So you can hold on to more questions.
That's okay. No, we'll talk about monkeys. So we'll get into howler monkeys, which I've studied in Costa Rica. We'll get into baboons, which have all kinds of interesting behavioral traits, and a whole variety of other ones, like the capuchin monkeys that actually hunt, which is kind of amazing for a little thing like that.
Okay, we have a question.
Mhm.
This is from Kelly. Have the lemurs been shown to recognize themselves in the mirrors?
Yes, yes, they actually, it actually seems to startle them in some ways. Not, recognize themselves. They see an animal, and then what you can do is you could dab something on the animal, like a little bit of paint or something like that. And after a while, they will seem to make a connection. It's like, oh, and looking in there and then looking and seeing a mark like that. Now, with something like a chimp or some monkeys, they sort of jump to that immediately. These guys, not quite that fast, but still, it's pretty amazing to see the response.
Okay. We have another one. Have you traveled to all of these places to study the lemurs?
Oh, I wish. No, alas, alas. I've never been to Madagascar. Embarrassingly, it's like, oh, I wish that would be so nice. And the places I've gone in Asia have been primarily urban places. So the only places where I've had a chance to see any of these in the wild is in Africa, and they're little glimpses on night walks. That's it. I haven't actually done research on them. So any of the behavioral research I've done has been on New World monkeys in Costa Rica primarily. So we'll come back to them a little bit next time.
Great. Okay, let's see. I think we have another one. Why did it take so long to recognize that there was actually a third kind of bamboo lemur?
Yeah. It gives you an indication of the fact that this is an out of the way place, all right. And to the local people, the differences are just sort of accepted, but to researchers, they hadn't really done as much work in that area, and all of a sudden they began to realize, oh, there's this other one here that looks slightly different, that eats a different array of foods, and I think in one case it was given a slightly different name by the natives too. And so it's a combination, but mainly it's just out of the way, and researchers hadn't really spent a lot of time looking there. So yeah, good question. It's kind of amazing that things could still be hiding from us, even today.
We have one. I think we have time for one or two more. Eyes seem bat-like. How far removed are the two species?
Oh, that's a great question. They're no further from them than any of the prosimians. But interestingly, if you go back to the earliest primates, and that's tough to document, because early primates, of course, have just sort of generalized features. And so it's hard to say, are they a primate or aren't they a primate? But there are arguments actually back and forth about, are earliest primates closely related to the predecessors of bats? All right. So you're onto something there, where there are discussions about, but it's more a question of going way back in time. Otherwise, it's still a lemur in many ways. It just has some unique specialization. Just like we're basically apes, but we have specializations too, and same sort of thing in that regard.
Great. We have one from April. Why is there cyanide in bamboo?
I have to be honest and say I don't know. I mean, it could be self-protection. I mean, plants do generate toxins for sure. Okay, That's probably the best argument, is that, you know, they generate toxins to basically, you know, minimize predation on themselves. But, you know, how do we prove it? You know, so it's like, it's a good story. And, you know, it's true for many plants and other compounds. So, you know, we're not even scratching the surface on the number of possibilities there. So it's, you know, probably the main argument for it is a, you know, defense mechanism.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, so that is all of our questions. Now I will pass it back to Stephana.
Okay.
Thank you, Mark. That was an interesting program, and I'm looking forward to seeing part 2, which will be on Wednesday, February 3rd at 7 p.m. And I think you said that was going to be New World and Old World monkeys next month.
Yep.
And then we will meet again one more time, the first Wednesday of the month, on Wednesday, March 3rd at 7 p.m. And you'll discuss apes.
Yep.
So I thank you all for attending, and I look forward to seeing you again next month. And I hope you enjoyed the program. Good night.
Thank you much.
Thank you.